Hey everyone, and a huge welcome back to the Learning Network. And we are joined today on the PDHPE CAFS podcast with Shirley Clarke. And it is quite early for me here in Australia at 4:30 a.m. But look, I'm used to being up early. Shirley, it's an absolute honour to have you on our podcast. Our teachers have been following your work for such a long time, and obviously, your research papers, your books. Your love of formative assessment and transforming classrooms has really shaped what has been happening in New South Wales schools for such a long time. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and how lovely to hear that I've had some kind of influence. So thank you for that feedback.
Yeah, and you have, and I think it only continues. And if teachers are listening today and they haven't heard of you or your work, can you give them a little bit of a rundown as to your experience, what you're involved in, and yeah, what your journeys look like?
Oh, okay. I'll give you a really abbreviated version of my career. So I was a primary school teacher for 10 years, became a primary maths consultant. I went to be a lecturer at the UCL Institute of Education. And during that time, I was very involved in summative assessment, but got more and more into formative assessment, which is not the measuring, but the enabling the progress, of course. And from the year 2001, I decided to go freelance. And after I ran a few national research projects at the Institute, looking at the impact of external testing on children, all sorts of things. But it was when I started to really develop formative assessment, and it sort of coincided with Paul Black and Dylan Williams' review that they had been commissioned to find out, what really helped children learn. And they brought out their whole review and Inside the Black Box, and it all married with my stuff. And at the time at the Institute, and this was became my raison d'etre, really, I was struck by all these educationalists were writing all these academic articles that teachers couldn't understand. And it seemed to me such a waste of all that fantastic research. And so as soon as I got to the point where I was working with teachers and had enough material to write a book, I decided that my whole purpose was going to be to bring the research into the hands of practicing teachers so that they could see what it looks like in the classroom and understand it, and relate to it, rather than, asking, well, what does that mean? And so on. So, and ever since 2001, I've been running what I call learning teams every year. These are groups of 28 teachers that invite me to run a learning team. I meet them for 3 times during a year, and I set them off with the latest strategies that link with the research of formative assessment. They try them out, they come back, they give feedback to each other and me, and that way the practice of formative assessment has evolved over the last now 24 years. So that if you read my first book, sort of Unlocking Formative Assessment in 2001, it's so simplistic compared to where it's got to now, where it's, we've really developed it and brought in extra little bits of research as well along the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really it. That's where I am. And my latest venture, and I don't know if you've come across this, is that I've written a book with two other authors on reducing anxiety in primary schools. And as that's such a big thing now in our schools, and I had noticed how in all of my learning team feedback, so many of the aspects, the strategies in formative assessment, people were saying part of the impact was it reduces anxiety for children. And I thought we need to link this up. So I worked with Dr. Angela Evans, who's a doctor of psychotherapy, and worked for CAMS, which is the Children and Adolescent Mental Health Unit in England. And then I found this by serendipity, this amazing head teacher in a Gloucester school who had a therapy background. And she really knew how to get her school into this sort of fantastic containment culture. the three of us together wrote this book, which came out last year. So
Awesome.
it's been exciting to go into something a bit different and to, blend the formative assessment strategies into that whole picture. Yeah. So
I haven't read that yet. I haven't read that one yet, but I will. But I've read your other books, and they're so profound. And I think you were so far ahead of the game and bringing practice to life. I think, look, I am one of those nerds. No, I'm going to say nerds. I'm one of those teachers who used to read all the articles, would print them off, and devour them. But your publications are just simplified and bring that research to life, which I think doesn't always happen in the academic world. You have academia and then schools, but I think you've really
Yeah.
bridged that gap between what happens in research and then what happens in practice in the classroom. And I love that. Like all of your books are very easy to read, but also very easy to implement the amazing strategies that you share. And I think for me, like me personally as a teacher, your work has shaped, the best part of 15 years of my 16 years in the classroom before I left. But now I get to share your work and, Paul Black, Dylan William, all of the amazing educators, roll all that up into one and then share it with our teachers across New South Wales. And it's funny, like, I'm so far ahead in my formative assessment journey, but for some of them, like, oh, formative assessment, what's his buzzword? I'm like,
What is it? Yeah.
where have you
Right.
been living?
Yeah. Yeah.
So obviously formative assessment has evolved in your 24 years.
Right.
What do you think has been the biggest thing that has changed the way we teach our kids in the classroom through formative assessment?
I think, first of all, there's more awareness of the importance of children's self-efficacy, which is their belief in their ability to achieve. And I always start my talks and my books these days with a whole list of all the barriers we've been putting in place so that children can't even begin to learn, let alone be involved in feedback, for instance. So that's a big factor. And then I remember, when I first started looking at all of this in the early 90s, it was still before the national curriculum came into English schools. It was still people were starting from an activity rather than the learning intention. And it's extraordinary now to think of those days because, all the planning, all the thinking that's done these days is taking the curriculum, deciding what you want children to learn, and then something that took a long time for people to get their heads around was breaking that down into success criteria, so that it's all been about giving children as much of a framework as possible for them to not only know what is expected of them, but how this learning, what's expected of them, breaks down into its component parts, so that they can be more a part of that. They can start to decide for themselves, what do I need more help with? I mean, I can remember at the beginning getting reports of children saying, I'm just no good at maths. Whereas once success criteria came in, they would say, I'm just stuck on this one. So they would start to be able to get more confidence about this. And the same with teaching. If you don't know what the criteria are, what the ingredients or steps are, how are you going to teach it in the first place? And then gradually the sort of importance of knowing what a good one looks like. And my favorite is showing children a good one next to a bad one, because then it's crystal clear. Tell me one thing that this one has that this one doesn't, and they can start to compile the success criteria for themselves. So co-constructing them and really starting to be much more in charge of that. And that's how you start to get quality and excellence, rather than I'll know it when I see it, which used to be something that, was very prominent. I know this will help them learn, and years ago, of course, and I'll know it when I see it. And I suppose then what you've got is fantastic influence of John Hattie's work, where his whole mantra of know thy impact has changed the way educators now decide what they're going to do as a school. It's very much more now, what evidence have we got that actually this is something is going to help our children's learning, rather than this is something we've always done, or we've just read something about this is the latest bandwagon. but actually really taking account of true impact, and only then making it part of your policy decisions. And yeah, the feedback that is the last sort of part of that really is, one of the biggest things that's happened, certainly in English schools, and I hope it's happened more around the world, is moving away from this writing to children, marking after the event, comments, which was a rite of passage we did have to go through to become more diagnostic. But the research shows that has far less impact than if you're doing in the moment feedback. So now I showed teachers videos of teachers walking around the room the whole time the children are engaged in any kind of independent work, and actually having those interactions with them on the spot. And that's reduced the after school marking. And I would say in the last 10 years, that's been the biggest thing I've seen changing, that teachers have got more time for planning and they've got a more, the work-life balance. But very importantly, they're moving the learning on quicker instead of the old days of taking in all the books and saying, oh, look, I've got 8 children who didn't understand it or whatever, and then having no time to do that. It's that all those misconceptions are being discovered, caught and, something acted upon during lessons themselves. Thinking of your subject, it's with anything visual, it's much easier in the moment to be just saying, okay, change it to this, use this foot, use that, or whatever. And what teachers have needed help with is that classroom management and what you do with children's writing, for instance, where, how do you just pick up spelling and grammar, or, whenever they've got any writing, that the feedback, can be at different levels. So yeah, those are the big changes. And the influence of cognitive science has been easing the cognitive load, especially over the last, again, 5 or 6 years. That's had a massive impact on education.
And look, you kind of, because we very much work with high school teachers, and two of our kind of main ways to work with those teachers are senior subjects. So we have 2 main senior subjects in New South Wales, and look, thousands of kids. We have one that about 17,000 New South Wales kids do, and probably 10,000 kids do our other course. And we still have mandated assessment. We still have assessment tasks that the kids do. We have to take away, provide them feedback on, because those marks are then, sent in to NESA and then graded for their HSC, and then it goes towards their ATAR. All of these good practices that we do on formative assessment, on feedback, are completely lost because we still have, in many schools and many countries, mandated. We have to. And it's disappointing, like we're still at that point, so far into the game. And I don't know, look, there's ways I know for me, certainly with my senior kids, I made it part of my practice, gave them feedback, instantly. And then obviously as my formative assessment journey moved on, the kids giving each other feedback, like that was the goal. Like, here's what a good one looks like, but actually there's good ones. How does yours compare to theirs? And
Exactly.
that's what the power was, the kids actually working together on that. You kind of mentioned learning intention success criteria, and I worked in the Parramatta Diocese, so we adopted formative assessment in New South Wales very early on. We were kind of part of like a bit of a pilot project and stuff. But then I moved from Sydney to the Central Coast, like beachy area, probably about 10 years behind everyone else. And they're still kind of implementing formative assessment. And I think, guys, where have you been? Like, you're late to the party, guys, but that's okay. How a lot of teachers say to me, like, I don't have time for it. Kids, the kids don't engage with it. What are some advice for them if they're busy, they're not sure?
Yeah, I've seen this journey, right from the very beginning myself with teachers, across the world, and certainly, obviously, my most experience is here in the UK. I think what people don't realise at first is that this is the tray to carry the 9 pints of beer. You don't have to be carrying them all in your arms. It's when you do formative assessment, people are at the end of the year in my teams usually say, most of them say, I'm doing less work and the children are learning more. It's about, implementing these things. And yes, of course, there's a pain barrier to go through when you introduce anything that's new, if it's going to be of good quality. But just sort of sticking with it, believing that this is the way forward. And obviously some things are actually going to fall by the wayside. But yeah, that business of I don't have time, I don't hear anyone saying that anymore here, because it's become embedded. And because they've realized if you invest 10 minutes in co-constructing success criteria for something, even with 5-year-olds, let alone, so much easier with senior kids, they are much more, they're far less likely to be getting stuck, misbehaving, asking for help, because they're more empowered. So I think that's what people have discovered, that this really gives the kids structure, and that's gives you less hassle.
And they kind of know where they're going. Like if you set those intentions and then co-construct the success criteria, they know where they're going. They know what to expect. They know what a good one looks like. And once they've achieved that success or gone beyond that, it's just, I think it's easier for them. Can I ask you a question about writing learning intentions? Because in a senior classroom, like there's so much to get through with curriculum. I don't know if this is best practice, but I did do this with my senior kids. I would often have them ready to go, but then they would kind of write their success criteria based on those learning intentions to save time kind of writing them all out or whatever we're doing in class. But then they were the ones who actually created the success criteria based on what we had developed for the learning intention. So I don't know if that's like kind of missing the...
I suppose yeah, no, not really. I mean, it depends. I kind of need an example, if you like, to just hang that on.
Yes. So we have, because it's prescribed curriculum, I would have that written out. I'm learning to blah, 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 blah. I would write that part of it. So the kids kind of...
Give me an example of a learning intention then.
I'm learning to explain the roles of parents and carers or whatever it is.
Okay.
And then the kids would have to say, obviously I'd have to explain to them what that actually meant, like to explain and to what the roles were. And then they would write, I can identify the 3 main roles. I can, provide an example for one of those roles or whatever. I can show the impact of those roles on parents and carers, that kind of thing.
But are they making those up themselves, or are you guiding them?
Yeah, me guiding them on the success criteria, but me writing the learning intention, and they then...
Okay. The only problem I would see with that would be that you wouldn't get sort of equal opportunities across the class, depending on what they come up with. I mean, my immediate thought with that was that for that, I would show them right at the beginning of the lesson, I would show them an example, or well, probably a little brainstorm about what do they think this is. But then I would show them from last year's class or year or whatever that you had. I would show them an excellent example of, say, the first 3 paragraphs, and I'd show them one that was fairly mediocre, and I'd read them through, and then I'd ask them with their learning partner, tell me one thing that you see as, the difference between this piece and this piece, just one thing that, get that one thing. Okay, let's write that up. And we've seen we've not only decided this is an important thing about this issue, but we've also seen how this person's written it in a way that really makes it work. And then I'd ask, okay, tell me another thing. And very quickly, because they've started discussing and, sort of identifying those aspects, I would co-construct the success criteria with them so that all of them have not only seen what are the key points here, but also we've seen how one person's written it in a way that's really really successful and meaningful. And I would think that would help them understand the whole issue and how to write better, etc., etc. Now, the only thing that we found over the years is if you don't then get a second excellent piece and look at that, you'll find they're all copying that excellent example, more or less, that you had at the front. They can't get away from, there might be a different way of putting this. So I would then follow that up with, well, here's a different one. It's just as good, but this person's, put it in a slightly different way, and just have a look at that. And I think that combination of the co-construction of the criteria, where, not every child is going to think of every aspect, but if they see it there in the excellent example, then they start to get it. Not only have they got the indicators, the criteria, but they've also seen what excellence looks like. Otherwise, I'm not sure how they go from success criteria to knowing how to make it look good.
Yeah.
What does it actually look like?
Yeah. And that's a hard thing, I think, with, with all learning, like having that evidence of best practice for the kids. This is what a good one looks like. Like, here's an example from last year. Here's one that I've written for you. And I say that all the time with our teachers. Like, you have to model it, you have to demonstrate it. Like, if you don't have that sample from the kids, you have to make it up and
create it. Yeah, absolutely.
Different examples. And look, we've done that a lot because we have a number of memberships supporting teachers. And I'm like, you guys want some sample answers? Okay, here's some sample answers that I've written based on my experience and expertise. You guys can then use those in class to actually have that conversation. Okay, what does a good one look like? What's our success criteria? What are we looking for? How does then that match up with our marks? And look, like I said, we have a very big, unfortunately, like the HSCs, like an exam, we have, a lot of summative tasks that we have to do, but we can embed all of these really good practices with what we do with the kids. And, just making it part of our everyday practice is like so key to kids learning, like, and it's simple things as well, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, what happens, I've found the co-construction of success criteria coupled with the what does a good one look like, what's a bad one look like, actually gets them to internalize those things and remember them in a way that they wouldn't if you just handed them the success criteria. Or didn't show them what good ones look like. It ends up being like it used to be in the old days, where after the event, the teacher says, okay, let's have a look at so-and-so's that was really good. And then the kids are all sitting thinking, well, if I'd seen that at the beginning, I'd have actually been, clearer about doing it myself in that way. So what I'm saying is it's an investment that might sound time consuming at the beginning, but what it means is that they have deeper learning experiences that they actually remember, so that when they come to the exam, and I do think there's a place for still summative testing, and formative, I always say, is the enabling the progress and the learning, and summative is measuring it. So, the more you do formative, the better they're going to do at the measuring, although obviously there is an issue of how good is the test? Does the test, is it valid? Does it actually test what it says it's going to test? And obviously there are lots of other issues about tests, children getting nervous and whatever. But, that is exactly what you're saying. It's a means to an end.
Yeah. And look, we could be here all the day talking about testing and the delayed feedback. Well, there's no feedback for our final exam. The kids get a mark and they don't actually see how they go. We teachers do. Teachers get to see their marks, but they don't get to see like their actual response unless they did very well. And
Right.
teachers want to buy back their exam to then show the kids, but the student has to give them permission to do that. It costs money, like our authority makes them pay for their exam. I'm like, oh my God. Anyway.
Now, how often are they doing that? Is that just like our GCSEs, sort of age 16 or something?
At the end, so 18, so at the end of this. Yeah. So but they then have year 11 that goes before that, and often there'll be like an end of year 11 exam, then a HSC, then the trial, then the actual HSC. So that's worth 50% of their marks, that final exam. So their classwork counts towards it, but then 50% is that final exam. Look,
Right.
Like I
Yeah.
said, we've come so far in the world of education and Australia, and that's still something that baffles me that it's so backwards. And I know that it's a means to an end, like it's to help
Wow.
calculate ATARs for kids to get to university. But surely we're at a point in education that we can come up with some other testing tool to give them a university entrance. But look, anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can only impact what we can impact, hey? I would love to ask you a couple of questions about feedback because feedback is like my ultimate favorite thing. And I know that you mentioned comments are gone and, the time it takes for teachers to provide comments. Verbal feedback's great in the moment. Like I said, a lot of our assessment tasks, summative tasks, there has to be that delayed feedback, unfortunately. I came across your tickled pink and green for growth strategy at some point in one of your publications. I'm like, I absolutely love that. But I'm
Yeah.
going to let you in on a little secret that I actually modified it a tiny little bit. So we call it pink for positive and then green for growth. So very minor tweak. And our teachers have been absolutely loving that. So getting their little felt tip pen and providing comments and stuff with those colors. Our kids love it. I then added an extra layer to that. So that's kind of like in the moment. But then at the end, I've introduced to a lot of New South Wales schools what I call win feedback. And I love your feedback on the feedback. So WIN stands for what the student has done well, improvements to be made, and then necessary actions to improve. And I thought just three things to focus on. And often making the kids kind of be part of that process. So often for the I would say the necessary actions is for it to then be put back on the kids. Like, okay, here's one idea maybe what you've done well, like your sentence like your paragraph structure is great. Improvements, maybe some more examples throughout your response to kind of show what you know. And then the kids go, okay, well, based on my comments, based on how I've gone, I'm going to then put some action into place. For some reason our teachers have absolutely implemented that with their younger kids, their older kids. They really love it. um, do you think that's a good kind of strategy to just focus on a couple of things rather than provide feedback throughout their whole response or across the whole exam? We have to give marks per question. That's the summative part. But would you suggest like a different way to kind of potentially look at marking in some of those summative tasks or just focus on three things?
Right. Well, there's a couple of things I want to say about that. First of all, if you think about the what you want them to be able to demonstrate in the summative exams, which is all their knowledge,
Yeah.
then what we know from cognitive science is, excuse me, the way in which you increase what's called the storage strength in our long-term memory is by constant retrieval. So the more a piece of information is retrieved from your long-term memory, i.e. you have to think about it or you have to write about it, the deeper the storage strength, the longer you'll remember it for. And that's why where I started teaching, it was seen as too much testing of children is bad. It actually turns out with cognitive science that we need to be continually revisiting things with kids that they've done in the past and retrieving them in low stakes settings. So pop quizzes, for instance, classroom, maybe apps that, people use where they're having to retrieve knowledge all the time. And working walls has become a result of cognitive science, where children are always being reminded of the different things they've learned over the last year or even before. It's common now in England for planning to include recaps from previous years' learning so that they're always retrieving information. So if you think about, so that's one thing that helps children have as much, in their long-term memory as possible for summative testing. But if you think of children in a lesson and you're walking around and they're writing something or whatever, it kind of links back to the success criteria and the learning intention. You've got, if it's, let's take, and every subject is slightly different. If you take mathematics, for instance, it's quite closed. You will have very specific success criteria that are compulsory elements, otherwise you get it all wrong. So as you're walking around, you're looking for where those things are going wrong and where they're going right. And marvelous mistakes has become a big thing in the UK. Is it okay if I share your mistake with the rest of the class when we have a mid-lesson learning stop, so we can all unpick it together and see how you made this marvelous mistake, so we're all learning from it. So mathematics, it tends to be fairly easy. You're just picking up misconceptions. You're, making sure, stopping the whole class if it's too many children are all still having the same problem. It's been things like children's writing that has been the most problematic for on the move, ongoing feedback. And I see what you're doing with the sort of, let's just look at one thing. But if I think back to the early 2000s, when target cards for children was a big deal, it was a big sort of thing that you'd give everyone a target. It might be to do with their punctuation or their spelling or anything at all. It didn't work all that well in the end. The research showed that they didn't have enough opportunities to actually practice the target. And very often they didn't know what they'd done wrong. They didn't have enough teaching to, almost like, if I'd known how to do that, I would have done it in the first place, So I think it needs to be focused on what is it we want you to learn from this lesson and what are the criteria we're looking for. And again, if we go back to writing, you've got two layers. You've got the sort of secretarial features, spelling, grammar, punctuation, vocabulary, that are easy for teachers to walk around and say, oh, you've got a bit of a mistake here. I'll come back in a minute, see if you found that. But what's harder for teachers is the actually making improvements in that. So imagine a kid's already written 2 paragraphs and you come and sort of scan it and think, they haven't said enough about X. Now, one of the breakthroughs for me was when I got teachers to experiment with leaving all children's writing books facing pages completely blank. Because now, if there's an improvement to be made, I could see what was happening was children were confined to the space available to make an improvement. If you have a blank facing page on every page, you can come around and say, how about if you have another 2 sentences just explaining a bit more about what you mean there? And then they just put an arrow and there it is, the space that they can write it. Yeah. So those improvements can actually be made there and then. And that's so much more powerful and impactful than me writing at the end of the lesson, at the end of the day, see if you can improve this ending or whatever, say more about X. And then the next day I've got to allow space in the next lesson for them to do that. And it's a day later or 2 days later, so they have forgotten it anyway. But we all had to go through that stage. What you're describing is an absolute stage that I think everybody needs to go through, where you become more diagnostic, where you are actually saying, what is it they need to improve? I don't even know. Okay, so I'm getting better at that now. I can focus on one thing they need to improve on. And after that, I'm going to start to see 2 things they can improve on. And then you need to get to the point in the end, which I think we've got to with a lot of schools now here, which is when a teacher can look at it all. And because they've looked at the success criteria and so on and seen what good ones look like, that they can start to see a more holistic thing,
Yeah.
And yeah, you've still got to decide. I can't tell the child they've got to do, the student to do 6 improvements. You've still got to decide, what's the thing that's going to make the biggest difference, maybe.
Yeah. And look, I think especially for young teachers, they're getting their head around the content, they're getting their head around the skills and writing, and our courses are very writing heavy, although we've got the PE, the physical education part of our course. The personal development and health part is very written, it's very analytical, lots of evaluation. Kids have to think lots of examples and then bring it all together. I think a lot of the kids do find it hard to put all of that together as a piece, but I think young teachers and even inexperienced teachers in that particular course will say to me, Kel, how do you just know? I'm like, I've seen enough of it over the years. I was
Experience.
HSC marker for 16 years, 5 of those years as the head HSC marker in our state. Like, I've seen enough to know. I've seen thousands of kids' responses to know what I'm looking for just by scanning it very quickly. And they're like, how do you even know that? I'm like, it's part of the practice. It's part of time. You see it. And I think in high schools it's tricky sometimes when they get changed, like, they're now teaching year sevens and year nines and year tens and year 11 and 12, and their syllabus changes. We have to get our head around that. I think,
Yeah, it's a lot. I know. Yeah.
yeah, it's a
I
lot.
mean, in the old days, there used to be what we called agreement trialing, moderation, where teachers would all bring examples of
Yeah,
children's writing, and then you'd all sit together and sort of judge it together. And I think, sometimes there's still a place for that.
I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I do have one question for you about the future of formative assessment and feedback. Where do you see, like, you've obviously been around for a while, seeing all of this unfold right before your very eyes, seeing the magic actually happen. Where,
Yeah.
where do you see it kind of going, and what are you most excited about?
Uh, do you know that's a really difficult question because I know this sounds uh, almost conceited. I don't mean it to, but I kind of very often feel like my job is done in the UK. And I get requests from places like Australia and other places, and I think, they don't realize I can't go that far to do 1 day's training. Um,
Unless they're going to pay you $20,000.
yeah, exactly. And so an awful lot has been achieved, which is amazing in terms of what we've developed in the learning teams. And I think it's almost, I don't know, I think other people are going to start to pick this up. My fear is that some of these things, what always worries me when I do a day's
Mm,
training, if I get any evaluations that say, oh, I remember doing this 10 years ago,
yeah,
and then we stopped, and I think, then you didn't embed it.
no.
And then I get other evaluations saying, yes, we've been doing this now for some time. And that's what's made me think, my job is done. I mean, in the first sort of 10 years, it was hostility. We haven't got time for this. And, what do you mean success criteria? So um, I'm near retirement now, although I shouldn't say that. I'm still working. But it'll be interesting to see where it goes. And certainly, I've been very excited by linking it with children's well-being. I have
Mm,
to say, because that's the biggest concern that I see amongst young people at the moment, and that really scares me,
mm,
worries me so much. I think so many kids are missing out on so much,
mm.
and if we can change what we do in the classroom, and not make it something bolt on, like let's have, I don't know, mindfulness first thing in the morning. That's
Yeah,
not going to help. It's what you do in the lessons that makes
yeah.
the difference.
Exactly right, Shirley. And I've been singing from that song with our, 'cause we've now kind of opened our membership to primary schools, and a lot of primary schools, in their wisdom, will have these well-being days. Will have this like little tiny bit of mindfulness. I'm like, if you guys actually like embedded PDHPE properly at your school, you wouldn't
Yeah,
have to, spend $5,000, $10,000 on a well-being program. Like, personal development and health is that. Like, if you actually
exactly.
bring all of that into your classroom when you're teaching literacy and numeracy and religion and everything else, that's what PDHPE is. And I think there's still I don't know, I don't know why people think that just that blanket solution is going to work. Actually go, like, you were an educator, you went to university, even though PDHP was a very small part of their work. If you actually embed that every day, imagine the impact on the kids, the growth mindset, the resilience, the determination, the self-esteem.
Yeah,
Like, we just,
absolutely. Yeah. And
um,
that, and if you link that with building their self-efficacy and getting rid of all the things that we know, actually make children feel that they're not going to be any good at learning.
yeah,
If so, I mean, I that's always the most challenging part still for teachers when I tell them that comparative reward systems are so damaging. Get rid of them all. Children are worried about making mistakes. You've got to have marvelous mistakes. Praise has got to be task related, not ego related. Stop saying clever girl, clever boy, or you're so brilliant at that, Jason, and have this ongoing commentary where there's verbal validation of everybody's achievement all the time. And I think that makes the biggest difference, is actually raising their self-efficacy so they believe they can learn, and get rid of all those stupid things like comparative rewards that still exist in every school. Just drives me nuts. Comparative rewards, there's research after research project, and yet still every school has them because they think the children are motivated by them. They're not. No. They don't put their hand up and say, oh, you completely demoralized me. Yeah. They think we're gods and that we know what we're doing. But it's getting rid of all of those things. I think bringing it all together with what you're saying, that is the way forward. And then those learning strategies that make them all feel empowered. Because motivation, if they say to you, how do you motivate kids? Motivation doesn't come first. Success comes first. Once they achieve success, then they're motivated because they think they'll achieve it again.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. I think losing sight of that you can have that in every classroom, having that success, enabling the kids to feel that success, celebrate that success. And it's the small wins, isn't it? Like the really small things that make a huge impact on the kids.
Yeah. I mean, this task-related feedback I'm really big on, where you're walking around the room the whole time, but you're all the time saying, oh, I can see you've got a capital letter and a full stop there, or love that simile, love the way you were cooperating, you two. So you're giving a message, a very clear message of what you value, what the school values, what you're here for, rather than, oh, good, house point for you, or,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wrap up, Shirley. If you were to give your younger teacher self some advice, what would it be?
Focus on the learning and be aware of your impact all the time as to what works and what doesn't work. I mean, there's a lot to say to a young teacher. I talk to PGCE teachers here every year, which is the postgraduate certificate in education after they've done a degree. And I always say to them, if you're in a school, your first school, and you're feeling like you're no good at this and you shouldn't have actually done it, it's almost definitely a problem with the school, that you don't have the support in the management of the school. You should be being supported by various strategies. Find another school, because that's exactly what happened to me when I started teaching. I thought, what am I doing that I can't control the kids. And when I moved to another school, suddenly I could teach. And, I think that's one of the first things I'd say. Don't believe you're no good at it. It's very often the school system that's at fault. But in terms of the teaching and so on, think about what you want them to learn and build fantastic relationships with them.
Yeah, and I think that you didn't say that out loud before, but I think certainly if you don't have the relationships there with the kids, they're not going to work with you. They're not going to work for you. And, especially at our end, a lot of the senior teachers that I talk to, they say, oh, I just can't get them to write. I'm like, and I feel like saying, what have you done to actually build relationships with them so they feel confident, so they are very happy to take risks in front of the class, for you to look at their work. It's kind of
build the culture. Exactly.
Culture. Yeah, I did have that in my kind of like little notes to ask you about culture, but I think you've kind of,
it's the self-efficacy thing. Yeah. And giving them a learning language and making clear your expectations. Again, if you just ask them to go and write something without all that information beforehand, then of course you're going to get kids who don't know what to do. So then they start chatting and so on and don't want to write, so make sure they're fully equipped. Modeling, one of the most successful schools I know, they have, on everybody's laptops, they've got all of these examples of good ones, and they're modeled with the kids, and the kids don't copy those out. They discuss them, and then they're left to do their own. But they internalize all of this stuff, and they can reproduce it in another context.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be my advice. And
And
also, well done for choosing the most incredibly rewarding career ever.
I agree. Like, I agree. Look, my story is I was at a beautiful school, like so much learning for me in my 14 years there. We had a sea change, and I then worked at a very toxic school who weren't open to collaboration. I mean, they said it on paper, but I worked with two particular teachers that made my life hell. And anyway, that's a long story.
Yeah.
I love teaching. I do miss the classroom because I'm not in the classroom. I get to have my little, a bit of a taste test when I go to schools, but it's not the same as having your own class and your own kids. And
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've got to love it. And one of the slides I always show teachers is the children who are hardest to love are the ones that need your love the most. And I think we've always got to hold on to that as well.
yeah, yeah. Look, I say it all the time. We have the opportunity to have the biggest impact on the kids that we work with. Like, our profession is very rewarding. It's so impactful. And I
Yeah,
think a lot of young teachers um, maybe don't stick it out long enough to really realize that and give up
yeah.
very quickly. Oh, it's too hard. There must be something else out there. I'm like, there's not. It's pretty damn rewarding, and it's pretty.
That's where they need mentors
Yeah,
and support, and a bit of team teaching, working together,
yeah,
watching other people teach, sharing plans, so there isn't all, a single load for teachers, new teachers.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Shirley, you're still working.
I
Where
am.
where can our teachers connect with you, hear about your work, follow along your journey?
Well, my website's being updated at the moment, so they can look at that. But I do offer, and this is where it's almost impossible, I think, for Antipodia. I do offer online Twilight courses, or and I did some with an Australian school in Victoria some while ago,
Yeah.
and it was something like 6 o'clock in the morning for me, and it was after school for them. But it quickly became sort of 5 o'clock in the morning or something for me, and it all fell apart a bit, really. I did quite a few sessions, but the time difference is the biggest problem. It's a shame.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I've also got 120 video clips on my video platform on my website.
Cool.
So it's anywhere in the world. People can subscribe for a year and have 20 users. And there's a fantastic amount to gain from those.
Yeah, and we'll put all those show links for teachers as well, and obviously
Yeah.
books, and Shirley's got her new book that came out last year, which I'll have to snap up a copy. It looks awesome. I can't wait to read. Oh, and
That
that little book is gold, like
is
gold.
good, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah. And it's cheap. It's cheap. So that's even better. And obviously this was the one I wrote with John Hattie, the visible learning feedback. So, there's a lot that's still in there, still absolutely, topical and relevant.
yeah, I agree. And look, thank you so much for your time. I know it's your evening, our morning. I feel very blessed to
Oh,
have a
pleasure.
very short time with you. I could be here for a whole day talking to you, but I'm not going to do that. But thank you so much, Shirley. I very much appreciate your work, your wisdom, your ideas, and just what you're doing still for education. You're still making an impact.
Thank you so much. It's very heartwarming, and it's been really lovely chatting with you. So I've really enjoyed it, and thank you for all your kind remarks.
Thank you. My pleasure.